Welcome everyone to the November Collin County Hobby Beekeepers Association Zoom meeting. Hope everyone is doing well, and I do believe I see a few questions already, but we'll get to them during the show or whatever. But okay. But anyway, if everyone, it's a very important meeting tonight. It's your chance to get rid of me. So I want everyone to vote. Later on, we'll mention the poll coming up. But again, we're going to be voting for next year's officers.
So stay online.
So stay online until at least after Blake Shook gives his presentation, then we'll have a vote come up. So if everyone will just be aware of that, that's great. Again, I hope everyone's doing well. I'm nervously getting ready for the bees to go to California in January. You'd think you have plenty of time. It's only November, but golly, I'm way behind. So anyway, I hope everyone's doing great. And if y'all have any questions, be sure and just send them in, and we'll get to them after Blake has his presentation. So Blake, are you available?
Hey, yes, sir, I am. I'm ready to go if you are.
Okay. Well, I'm passing it on to you. So take it away.
Great. Okay. Well, let's jump in here. So a couple things to keep in mind for November. You know, it's been an interesting month so far when it comes to bees and beekeeping, because you know, it was supposed to be cold this month, and it was in October, and then somehow that cold disappeared. So this has done a couple interesting things as I've been out looking at the bees. So we're definitely seeing dwindling fall blooms. I mean, October was absolutely stunning. I mean, October was one of the best fall nectar flows and pollen flows I have ever seen. I mean, the goldenrod was incredible, and the weather was good. We got some rains. There was just such a night and day difference from early September to early October, and the bees really responded well. You know, like we talked about in October, you know, they really grew so well in October because of that strong pollen flow. And then that cold front hit in late October, and it really just put quite a damper on everything, the fall honey pollen flow, the bees growth, etc. So the flowers are about done. I mean, in the upper left, you know, I took this a couple days ago. I mean, the upper left, you've got the goldenrod's about done. The lower left that's their aster, it's gone. The lower right is broomweed, that's about gone. Somehow I found one little lonely scabiosa bloom there in the upper right. No clue how that's still blooming. That was supposed to be done in June, but one little flower hung on. So the bees are still bringing in pollen, not as much certainly as they were, but I'm still, you know, I was out in the bees today and I still saw some pollen coming in. No idea where exactly they're getting it. There's still, I guess, a little bit of broomweed blooming, but it's certainly dwindling fast. And so as a result, you know, what I'm seeing the brood dwindle. You know, I'm not seeing, you know, in October, I had a lot of hives that had, you know, 6 to 8 frames of brood as that queen really kind of kicked it into high gear, raising that winter generation of bees. And boy, what a difference from mid-October to now. You know, going through hives now, there's still the occasional really strong hive that has multiple frames of brood, but by and large, the brood is dwindling fast. And these are pictures I took a couple of days ago, and you can really just see them shrinking that brood nest down there. They're filling in honey around the brood. They're really reducing the area that queen has to lay. And as sad as it is to see, that's perfectly normal. And it's exactly what I would expect to see this time of year. I would expect those queens to begin shutting down, for that brood to start consolidating. And you may still see eggs, but oftentimes the bees will cannibalize those eggs. So the queen will continue laying, but the worker bees know we're going into winter, and oftentimes they'll eat those eggs before they have a chance to develop into larva or pupa. And that's unfortunately pretty normal too, as the bees really try to shut that queen down for the season. So it's normal. This is what I usually expect to see in going into mid-November here. So this is really the end of the season for beekeeping. I mean, the growth has largely ended. Your hives kind of are what they are at this point. They're not really going to grow a whole lot more. What your population is now is about what it's going to be going into winter. And so we're certainly seeing that cooling temperatures, they're really causing that rapid reduction in brood production. Temperatures are staying pretty warm, and the next couple of weeks look pretty warm too. So I would expect to see lingering brood in the hive, but I wouldn't expect to see large amounts of brood. Even though it's staying warmer, the bees know that the pollen flow is going away and winter's on its way. And so you shouldn't expect to see large amounts of brood. Like I said, there's still a pollen trickle, but it's wrapping up really quickly. So even if it stays warm, that'll begin fading off here pretty quickly. Not really seeing any nectar flow. We're going to get into this cycle now of major cold fronts and then warmer weeks, kind of that back and forth that's really normal. And so you're going to see days where your bees are out flying and days where they're not flying at all. And that's kind of what I expect to see this time of year. So kind of getting into bee tips, for the month of November, a few things that aren't necessary here in the South. There's a lot of talk of candy boards or fondant. Basically, the concept is you make a cake of candy, of sugar, like a sugar cake, and you put it on the top bars of the hive, and the bees can eat it over the course of the winter. There's nothing wrong with them. I mean, it's not going to hurt the bees at all. These are really popular up north, where syrup freezes in the hive, or you can't get to your bees for months on end. And that they're a little more popular up north. Here in the South, bees use syrup much more efficiently and more quickly than candy or sugar patties. When it's a sugar patty, they have to actually turn it back into a liquid before they can really use it. And so it's a lot more work for them. So in general, if my hive still needs food, I still prefer feeding them liquid syrup rather than a sugar patty or sugar candy. Now, again, those fondant or whatever you want to call them, it's not going to hurt the bees. It's just not quite as efficient for them. Insulating hives, hive wraps, etc. We do not use those here in the South. They're actually pretty risky to use here in the South, because you can wrap up your hive and then we get a sudden 80-degree day and you cook your hive. So they're debated whether or not they're even necessary up north. This picture was in New Brunswick, Canada. So they're kind of necessary there, but they usually have 10 feet of snow over the course of the winter. So in the South, really not necessary. An upper entrance to prevent condensation, you might read about those. Again, it can help a little bit, but again, we don't have the same harsh colder winters, and so it's not as much of a necessity here in the South. As far as feeding, I mean, hopefully if you did everything right leading up to winter, you don't need to feed anymore. If your hive has 30 to 40 pounds in the second box, you're good to go. You probably won't have to feed again until spring or February-ish. So if they do not have that though, then you can feed up to a gallon a week to get them to that point. So the goal is for a strong hive, 30 to 40 pounds of honey or syrup stored in the second box, and then 3 to 5 frames of honey, down in the brood box below. Now, hopefully if you don't have that, try to achieve it quickly, because once it starts getting really cold outside, once the days are in the 50s and below, the bees are much slower at taking syrup, because they're not breaking, they have to break the cluster to access the feeders to get syrup, and they're not going to do that when it's cold. So a couple quick caveats to that 30 to 40 pound stored rule. If your hive is not really strong, and by strong, I mean a deep box full of bees or more. If they're a deep box full of bees or more, they need that to 30 to 40 pounds. If they're less than that, if they're just half a deep box or so, or not a full deep box full of bees, they may need half that. They may only need 20 pounds in the second box and 2 or 3 frames of honey down in the bottom box. So the amount of honey they need does vary depending on the strength of the hive. The reason in Texas we need a fair amount of stores is because all these warm weeks, and we're in the middle of it right now, it's getting cooler. The nectar flow and pollen flow is largely ended, or it's coming to an end, and yet it's still warm outside. And so the bees are still flying. So that those worker bees are still out burning up energy on these warm days and warm weeks without being productive, but it does burn energy. So it takes some significant stores to get them through the winter as they keep foraging and flying and burning that fuel. You do need to feed 2-to-1 syrup rather than 1-to-1. The 2-to-1 syrup, they're able to use it more efficiently, use it more rapidly. They don't have to evaporate water out of it. So the 2-to-1 syrup is the way to go this time of year. And then use a division board feeder or top feeder rather than an entrance feeder. The entrance feeder, the bees have to go all the way down to the entrance to access that syrup. And it's just too cold a lot of days. Not yet, but it will be soon. And so an internal feeder stays a lot warmer. The syrup doesn't freeze and the bees are able to access it even if it's chilly outside. So go with the internal feeders for this time of year. As far as feeding pollen substitute, we're almost done. We're almost done feeding pollen substitute for the year. Finally, I recommend feeding about 2 1-pound patties over the course of November. And my goal is to just stretch that brood rearing out as long as I can. And usually once the pollen flow wraps up about now, if I give them a pollen patty or two, the queen will keep laying and they'll keep rearing some brood for an extra few weeks. And that just boosts the population of my hive that much more going into winter. So I stop feeding pollen substitute usually early December. I would especially recommend continue feeding pollen substitute this year because it's so warm. And so because it's so warm and it looks to be warm through much of November, you have a pretty good shot at encouraging continued brood rearing through November. And it's not going to be a lot. Don't expect to see 5, 6, 7 frames of brood, but they may go ahead and raise a couple more frames of brood, which is thousands of extra bees. So I would recommend, and I'm doing the same thing, I'm still feeding pollen substitute, especially when it's this warm through the month of November. A weaker hive, you may just give them 1 patty. One nice thing about when it cools off, is small hive beetles aren't as much of a problem. Now they're still there. I was surprised. I put pollen substitute on a bunch of hives Friday, I believe it was, and I went back into them today. And I did see some small hive beetles and some small hive beetle larvae on the pollen patties. So they're still there, though as it gets cooler, they become more and more dormant and less of an issue as well. I've never actually seen a hive in North Texas slimed out or destroyed by small hive beetles this time of year. I've seen it in Southeast Texas, but it's unusual the colder it gets. And then, like I said, I don't usually feed pollen substitute in December. So I wrap that up by early December. A couple other side notes, dead bees, what's normal versus abnormal. You're going to see dead bees this time of year in front of your hives. I would say that bottom picture there is pretty normal, a few dozen dead bees. And that's just your summer bees are starting to die off. Those bees that were taking care of the hive and active during the summer that have a shorter lifespan, those bees are starting to die off. And that's perfectly normal. That top picture where there are hundreds of dead bees, that's not normal. Even this time of year, I don't want to see that. That's usually a sign of a pesticide kill, major robbing behavior, or potentially a major varroa might die off. So again, a couple dozen bees or more, I would say anywhere from 20 to 100 dead bees is fairly normal around your hives this time of year. Hundreds and hundreds or thousands, that's not normal. Order your queens and nooks if you haven't already. A lot of queen breeders and nook suppliers sell out fairly early on. So if you haven't placed those orders, it's never too early to get a jump start on that. So I'd recommend go ahead and doing that. And a lot of people that don't sell out, like us even, it's all about getting those early nooks or those early queens or early hives. The earlier you get those queens or the earlier you can get your nooks, the better chance you've got at making honey in your first year. So I always tell people that, you may not, your supplier may not run out, like we rarely run out, but the early dates sell out really quickly. So if you're ordering nooks or ordering queens for next year, I'd recommend go ahead and doing that so you can get those early April dates ideally. Another consideration is, and I know I'm going 100 miles an hour, but if you have questions, I'll hopefully have time at the end, and I can definitely answer any questions you guys have. But if you're looking at your hives, this is a time of year to really start considering doing combining if you have weaker hives. So if your hive looks like this in the picture, it's not going to make it through the winter. If it's 4 frames of bees or less this time of year, I go ahead and combine them. So if it's 4 frames, front and back covered, deep frames with bees or less, I go ahead and combine them with another hive of similar strength or a stronger hive. Now, a couple things to consider before you combine hives this time of year. One is, and I forgot to throw this in the slide, but you never want to combine a really unhealthy sick hive with another hive, because then you'll just kill both of them. And usually what I look for is I'm looking for brood. I want to make sure any brood the weak hive has looks normal. I don't want twisted larva or yellow larva, or I want normal, healthy looking brood. And then I want to make sure they don't have a varroa mite problem, and that's weak. Because if you take a small hive that's overloaded with varroa mites and you combine it with a strong hive, you're going to kill both of them with varroa mites. So as long as it's a hive that doesn't have any apparent brood issues, doesn't have high varroa mite levels, then I'm going to go ahead and combine it with another hive. A few things to look at is, when you look at its temperature, the colder it is outside, the tighter that cluster is going to get inside the hive and the weaker it's going to appear. So if it's 30 degrees outside, or even if it's 40 degrees and you're looking early in the morning or late in the evening, that's not a great time to judge the strength of a hive, because you can have an 8-frame hive when it's really cold outside look like a 4-framer. And when it gets up to 60 or 70 degrees, they loosen that cluster and they're much stronger. So before you start combining hives, I would do it on a day that's at least in the 60s or so. Mid 50s or above is probably more accurate. And that's the temperature you will kind of want to take a look and do combinations if needed. Counting frames of bees, total all the frames in every box. So when I'm saying 4 frames of bees or less, that's a total of everything in all the boxes in the hive. So if you've got 3 frames in the bottom box and 3 frames in the top box, well, that's a 6-framer. So I wouldn't necessarily combine that just yet. As far as methods of combining, we've talked about it in lots of bee talks before, but you can certainly put newspaper between the two, put newspaper on top of one of the hives, set the weaker hive on top of that and let them chew through the newspaper. And that's a great way to do it. I like to kill the queen in the weaker hive. And that way, if it's a weaker hive, maybe it was the queen's fault. So I kill her. And that way I know the stronger hive I'm joining it with, it has the better queen theoretically. And so, that's a much better way to do it than just letting the queens fight it out. So I like to kill the queen in the weaker hive. There's certainly plenty of times where I'm in a hurry, or it's cold outside, or for any number of reasons, and you can, especially this time of year, just put the 2 hives together and not worry about the newspaper or anything. And this time of year, I don't see that being a really big issue. When it's hot outside, or if it's summer and you throw 2 hives together, you can get a lot of fighting. This time of year, when it's cooler outside, I don't really see that as much. I mean, I might see a couple percent of the bees die due to fighting, but in general, those 2 clusters just kind of merge together in the cold. So it's not as critical. You go through the entire newspaper method process this time of year. You can just kind of stick them together. And if you've got 2 weak hives, you can just pull the frames of bees out and merge them into one hive. You don't necessarily have to stack the 2 boxes together. Now, I do like to have 2 boxes together if they're both full of honey. But if you've got, if you're joining this 4-framer here in the picture with a hive that's, 2 deep boxes full of bees and honey, I may not stack that 3rd box on top. Sometimes I'll just take those 3 or 4 frames of bees out and stick them in that top 2nd deep of a different hive. Or if this weaker hive doesn't have any brood at all, I'll oftentimes just smoke a stronger hive, and I'll just shake all the bees in front of a stronger hive and they'll just march right in and join with that stronger hive. So there's a variety of ways to do it this time of year that I wouldn't necessarily do in the summertime. Okay, let's hit a couple more quick topics and then we will get to your questions. Now, as a caveat, I know we're not having a December meeting, and that's kind of okay. Everything I'm talking about here in November pretty much applies in December. There's not really anything different that we'll talk about in December that we're not covering here in November. Though, and then in January, when we get together again, who knows, maybe in person, then January is when we really start talking about spring. And so that'll be a really important one as we get into, okay, spring's coming. What do you need to do to get your bees ready? But for now, let's talk about inspecting the bees during the winter over the next, really November and December. So as you look at your bees here in November, what should you be looking for? So I'm usually looking for brood and eggs, not because I expect to see a lot of it, but I still like to at least see some eggs in the hive to reassure me that the queen is present. Most hives, even weaker ones, still have at least a little bit of brood and some eggs. So, if you've never been able to spot eggs in the past, then don't worry about doing it now, but most hives should still have some brood and some eggs. Pollen stores, there's not a whole lot you can do about it at this time of year, but if there's no pollen stored anywhere in the hive, that could be a reason you may not see any brood at all. And I would, of course, give them some pollen patties to, get them going into the winter. Pollen patty consumption, I'm always checking that as I'm doing my checks in November. I'm making sure the hives have eaten or are eating and working on their pollen patties. And then, of course, population is huge. That's really primarily what I'm looking at when I look at my hives in November is, hey, are they strong? Are there a lot of bees? Is that population holding up? And so that's a huge thing I look for in November. And then quick side note, since we're going to cover December here tonight too, is it's pretty much the same thing in December, except I don't expect to see any brood or eggs in December. Sometimes you will. Sometimes you'll still see brood and eggs in December, but as many hives as have a little bit of brood, that many hives won't have any at all. So I'm not really expecting to see any brood. So in December, I'm not really pulling frames out of my hives at all in the month of December. The most I do in December is go and lift up on the hive a little bit, make sure that they still have plenty of food, and then maybe crack the lid, crack the boxes apart just to get a look at the size of the population. And that's about it. I'm really not pulling frames out at all in December, unless I'm just bored and really curious. So, and then on a warm day, I might go ahead and pull a frame or two out and just see what's going on. As far as when to look at your hives, there's a couple things. I hope this isn't confusing, but I kind of broke down when I look at hives in the wintertime. So if I'm looking at a hive for less than 1 minute, kind of what I just described as far as a December check. So if I'm looking at them for less than 1 minute and I'm not pulling any frames out of the hive, I'm just maybe lifting up on the boxes to see how heavy they are, maybe cracking them apart, looking at the size of the cluster, maybe popping the lid, looking at the size of the cluster. So if I'm just kind of doing that and it's done in less than a minute, then I don't like to do that unless it's above 32 degrees. But if it's above 32 degrees, I'm okay with cracking the boxes apart, taking a quick look. The cluster will reform really quickly and they typically are fine. If I'm looking at them for more than 1 minute, and if I'm maybe pulling out a frame to get a quick look, then I like for it to be sunny and above 40 degrees. If I'm pulling out several frames, and so I'm kind of doing a more thorough inspection, maybe in there for several minutes, then I want it to be sunny and above 50 degrees. Ideally, all that being said, in the winter months, I like to look at hives in the heat of the day, as much heat as it gets anyway, and several hours before dark to allow plenty of time for the cluster to reform. And for any bees that fell out or flew out when you're looking at them, they've got time to get back into the hive. You don't want to look at a hive at 5 p.m. right before dark, and then it's quickly going to get really cold once that sun sets. You want to give them plenty of time to reform that cluster, bees to make their way back into the hive, et cetera. So in the winter, I'm usually looking at bees around noontime, and that way they've got all afternoon to kind of bounce back and recover. And even if I'm cracking boxes apart, this time of year, I kind of stop looking at bees at 3 p.m. just to give them plenty of time to reform everything for the cold night. And all that being said, a lot of beekeepers are afraid to look at their bees in the wintertime. bees handle cold really well. If you follow these principles, and even if you get outside these principles a little bit, the bees really handle cold well, much better than they do heat, in fact. So it's better to look at your hive and make sure primarily that they've got plenty of food. That's the big thing we look at this time of year. It's better to look at them than not. So don't be afraid to check them. Don't be afraid to lift up on the boxes, crack the boxes apart, check on the population, make sure they've got plenty of food, everything's okay. It's way more risky and way more likely that they are harmed for running out of food than them getting too cold because you opened up the boxes. So I've worked bees in the snow plenty of times, and I've worked bees below freezing plenty of times, and they're typically just fine. So make sure you check them when they need to be checked, and don't skimp on the care during the winter. Here's just pictures of, cracking the boxes apart, popping the lid quickly, just to make sure the bees are doing okay. So that kind of leads to the next question. I think this is the last slide, which is how often to inspect your hives during the winter months. You know what? This is me personally. I usually inspect twice per month-ish, November through January. Maybe more like once per month in December, but usually at least twice in November, once or twice in December, and then at least twice in January. So for November, I'm adding pollen substitute, checking on the cluster size, feeding if needed. December, I'm not really adding pollen substitute December, but I'm just checking the cluster size. I still give them food if they need it, even though they take food so much more slowly in December. If they need it, still certainly give it to them, and they'll still consume it on the warm days. So not inspecting a ton. I'm not doing long inspections, just quick checks, making sure everything is good to go and the bees are happy and healthy. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen, and let's see, did we have any questions pop up here? So someone asked, if your hives aren't quite small enough to really warrant combining now, but maybe they shrink in December, is it still okay to combine later? Absolutely. So, as a general rule of thumb, if there are 4 frames of bees or less in November, I go ahead and combine them. But honestly, in December, if there are 4 frames of bees in December, I don't necessarily combine them. I would say if there are 3 frames or less in December, then I combine them, and kind of the same for January, because the longer that hive makes it, the more likely they are to survive the winter and come out on the other side and start growing. So if you can get those bees to, February, when the pollen starts flowing, they'll start growing. So in general, a 4 framer in November won't survive until next spring. But if there's still 4 frames in December or January, there's a decent chance they'll pull through. So you don't have to be crazy aggressive combining. If you think, is that a 4 framer? Is that a 5 framer? It's okay to leave them. Give them another month and see if they pull through. But if they continue shrinking and they're down to maybe just 1 or 2 frames in December, go ahead and combine them. But if you think there's a chance that they might pull through, it's okay to leave it and just cross your fingers and hope they pull through. Mark asks, if you have 2 deeps and 1 medium box, and the top medium is about half full of honey, and there's also honey in the deeps, do you recommend reducing back to only 2 deeps, I assume? So I think your question, Mark, is if you've got 2 deep boxes and a medium box, should you start shrinking that down and taking boxes away because they've got a lot of boxes? Not necessarily. Because the small hive beetles and the wax moths are largely going dormant, it doesn't hurt to leave a little more space on your hive. The bees don't keep the entire inside of the hive warm. They really only keep the cluster warm inside the hive. And so, it's not like they're going to get colder if they have more space. And in fact, if there's honey in those upper boxes, the bees will oftentimes move up into that over the winter as they need more food. So the time where I start pulling boxes off is if the hive's really weak. So if you've got, in your situation, if you've got 2 deep boxes and the bees aren't even filling up 1 deep box, and you've already got 30, 40 pounds of honey in the second deep box, then yeah, I'd go ahead and pull that medium off. If I know that, there's no chance this small, weak hive is going to need that extra medium. But if you've got 2 deep boxes and they're both full of bees, and then you've got a medium up top with some honey in it, I'd leave it for them. So hopefully that makes sense. I mean, like I said, the time I start pulling boxes off is if the hive's weak, less than a deep box full of bees. And I know there's just no way they're going to need all that honey. But if there's a chance, if they're a good, strong hive and there's a chance they need it, it's fine to leave it. John says, Varroa count on your hives 2 weeks ago was 7. You have the ApiGuard, but are hesitant to use it out of a concern the bees may get chilled due to the empty hive box above the brood box as recommended. Is it okay to treat now? That's a really good question. So if you have a hive, I recommend treating anytime your Varroa count is over 2 per 100 bees. So being 7, I would certainly recommend treating. And you're absolutely on the right track. I would use ApiGuard this time of year because it tends to be really effective as the hive becomes more and more broodless. So what I would do, and I don't quite know your situation, but with ApiGuard, I don't usually put an empty box on top. I put the ApiGuard between my two brood boxes. So whether you've got 2 deep boxes for brood boxes or a deep and a medium, I would put that tin of ApiGuard right in between the 2 boxes and leave it at that. If you just got a single hive, then yeah, if you single brood box and no supers, just 1 box, then yeah, you need to put an empty shell on top and put that ApiGuard in and put a lid on top. And if that is your situation, it's fine. Especially as warm as we are in November, it's not going to hurt the hive to have that extra space on top. They're not going to get too cold. Even when it's really cold, it's not going to hurt them much. So I would getting those mites under control is far more important than anything else. So definitely treat them, get those under control, and you've got time. I mean, the next couple of weeks are really warm, and how it's looking, we may even have a warm start to December. So get that ApiGuard treated, get them taken care of, and you should be just fine. So that's all the questions that I'm seeing, unless I'm missing something, Mike or Russell. If there's no more questions, then I will turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions either. So if any more come in, we'll deal with them later. But
okay,
we'll
sounds
go
good.
ahead and call it a night for that then. Appreciate
Awesome.
it.
You bet. Thanks, guys.
All right. Okay. What we'll do now is we'll go straight to the board election. Mike, if you'll bring up the poll and everyone can see it. Just do the following. There's only 1 person per slot, so all we need is say yes or no, and hopefully you don't abstain. All right. Well, like I say, okay, we had 29 people on and 22 voted for. So our new board will be Skip Talbert for president. Vice president will be Stephen Poole, and treasurer is Mike Hatch. We did not have anyone for secretary, so hopefully Nancy stays in that position.
Or someone will step up.
Yes. But anyway, so now what we'll do is we'll go to the next part of our meeting, and Skip, I'll let you take it away.
Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody's vote. So Russell can step down so he can enjoy not having to do this again, but I know he enjoys it. Just a quick information. Rex Smith is I've worked with him for a couple years and moving bees, gone to California with him and done some other stuff. But his main focus that I've worked with him on was removals, and I think he's probably done just about every kind of removal that has come out there, and probably some that we probably couldn't even think of. So I asked him to come on just to kind of give you an idea of what the situation is as far as doing removals. It's just not an easy job, and it's not free bees. So definitely wanted to get him on here, so those that are interested or getting close to somebody that does have a removal problem, that he can kind of give us some tips and some tricks that we can use. And I know I've heard lots of different stories from him. So Rex, we sure do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And when you asked me to speak, I was a little uncertain. And as I got to thinking about the things I would cover, my first thought was that, oh, we'll have a 10-minute conversation and that's it. And the more I got to writing things down, I realized, we could talk all night if we wanted to. So if we go long, let me know. Well, my name is Rex Smith, and I am my company is Harmony Hollow Apiaries. I've been beekeeping for about 10 years now. In fact, my first hive I got from your father there, Skip, from John, about 10 years ago, and just immediately fell in love with the bees. And like a lot of people, my first thought is, oh, how can I increase my numbers? Let's catch swarms. And then later I thought, well, gee, people are calling me about bees in their houses, and learned real quick that that's work. So you're right, absolutely. There's no such thing as free bees. Learned that real quick. As far as some of my background, some of what I do is contract bee management. If people have hives or want hives on their land that they want to own, but not necessarily do the maintenance, I'll do that maintenance for them under a contract, where they pay me a fee monthly or yearly, whatever we work out that works for everyone. I'll place bees on people's land for ag valuation, so that they can either maintain their old valuation, or they can wait the required period and then get the ag valuation however many years that's between them and the appraisal district. Something else that I do is beekeeping education. I was under contract this year with Nike and Bacardi to do education for bartenders that were out of work for COVID. And so Nike and Bacardi paid me to do some classes for those bartenders. I don't sell alcohol. They wanted me to do it for free. And I said, no, find someone else to do it if you want me to do it for free. So they changed the contract and included me getting paid to push their product. So that's the only way I would have done it. Something else that I've recently been active with is a company called Arista Bee Research. It's based out of the Netherlands, and they're doing research on breeding bees that are Varroa resistant, in that they will remove the larvae from capped brood, larvae and pupae from capped brood, so that are infected with mites. So it's trying to breed a better bee. So that's just one of the initiatives. I don't know where that initiative is going to go with 2020 happening and everything, but so that's to be seen in the future as to how Arista moves forward. I also do, a little bit of honey sales and some nuke sales in the spring, just a very few. So I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about doing removals, and so swarm catches are one way to increase numbers. That's a decent way to increase numbers. There's also doing removals from structures, which is a terrible way to increase your numbers. There are a lot easier ways to grow bees, making splits, buying queens, make your own queens. That's a lot easier than doing removals. So that said, in our industry, there's non-structural bee removals and structural bee removals. And those are designated largely by my insurance company. They wanted to know, when they were interviewing me for my coverage, how many removals do I do that are structural? Well, they define structural as being out of a house that is occupied. Non-structural, they can, if it's not somewhere where people are living, they call it non-structural. It could be a barn, a shed, a valve box in front of the house, or an irrigation box, a tree. That's non-structural as far as their legalities. That also makes a difference into how the work is charged. When you're dealing with selling a job, labor in Texas is taxable. A lot of people, that think that it's not, that it is. It is considered pest control. So if you've got bee removal that you've taken out of a valve box, that's not taxable, because code says for pest control, it's only applies to structures, or structures. So so bee removals out of a home are taxable. Out of a barn, shed, valve box, tree, those are not taxable. So just to know that, if you are in the business of doing bee removals, part of the work is supposed to be taxable. I know none of us like paying more taxes than we have to, but it's part of our society. So let's talk a little bit about swarms. I'm going to cover each of the ways to do removals. So swarms, and I'm not going to presume what anyone's knowledge is on doing removals. We may have people that have never thought about it before, and then we could have everyone here who's, I'm talking to the choir. So swarms is going to be bees that have initiated their way of reproducing. And so you've got hives that has the old queen and 2/3 of the workers have landed on a tree limb. You get a call, or you look in your own bee yard and see bees out on a limb, shake them in a box and go. Put them in a new box and you're good. That's probably the easiest way if you're thinking to increase numbers to do that. Sorry, I'm checking my notes here. As far as non-structural bee removals, I would say that probably 10 to 15% of the removals I do are non-structural. And one reason for that is not because of the calls that I'll get in, it's because of the way I price my work. Some people some people are willing to work for free. And so on that kind of job where it's from a valve box, I price my work higher than everyone else, just because I know that there's people going to be, willing to do it for free or for a low cost. So if someone does choose me for that work, then they are valuing either the word of mouth that I've got or that has been passed along for my work, or they're just really in need as far as getting those out of there quickly. For doing bee removals from homes, there's some legalities. First of all, the Texas Apiary Inspection Service has a list of folks that do bee removals and are have paid the $35 permit fee for transport of bees. There's a misnomer that people think that is a removal permit. It is not a removal permit. That permit is for transport of bees from one county to another. So it's up to the customer to do their due diligence and ask the right questions of the person doing the removal, so that they know what to expect when I get there or when anyone gets there to do, to open their home up. Some of the questions they need to ask is, hey, are you insured? What should I expect as far as putting things back together once you've opened them up? Of course, what's the cost and what's going to happen, a year down the road? Is there a warranty on your work? Is there, do you fill the space in with insulation, that void space where the bees were? And so anyone doing a removal needs to be able to answer those questions for their customer. Let's see. I also have a contract that is between my customer and I it's basically a work order saying that they understand that there's bees in their home, bees that have stingers on one end of their body, and if people are around, they could get stung. When you open up a home that's got bees in it, sometimes they don't like you opening things up, depending on how long they've been there. So they can act defensively, just as our hives in our bee yards can. And that'll change with weather. It's not always genetics. A lot of times that's environment related as far as their behavior. I highly urge anyone that's doing bee removals from homes to have liability insurance for what you do. Every year it seems like I see an article where someone in Arizona has used a smoker, or heck, they've just lit a limb on fire trying to smoke bees out of their soffit, and they burn their house down. That happened in Arizona last year, and I believe Houston or down in South Texas had that happen also. So having yourself covered by some kind of liability insurance, that way there's some recourse for who you're doing the work for in case you cut through a water line that's up in this in a wall, electrical line, gas line. Those things are very real, and they're in the homes. And so I've seen pictures every year of a beekeeper who has an oops, and they cut through a water line, and there's water spraying, or a gas line. It's got to be, plumber's got to be called, and that liability insurance will cover you in case of catastrophe. As far as another thing that has come up recently is legislation. 2 years ago, well, I guess it was a little more than 2 years ago, someone had tried to pass a law with the Texas legislature saying that anyone who does bee removals has to have a training and a license to do that kind of work. And there was a motivation behind that for the person who introduced it, in that they wanted to be the only company to provide training. And so the beekeepers who were involved with it and noticed that legislation made sure that it did not pass or even get to a vote, because we needed to represent our trade. So out of that legislation and the failure of it, there's a new organization called the Texas Association of Professional Bee Removers that has been worked on in the last 6 or 8 months. And in fact, this month we're having our elections also for our initial board. But part of that is going to be training and a path for people to learn how to do removals in a manner that is respectful of the people's home, and it's going to be kind of a watchdog for legislature and be a voice for those of us who do this work, and be able to have an input from us before anything might go to legislation. Hopefully it doesn't happen. I don't like having laws against my work. If someone can have a roofing company that's just a pickup truck and a group of workers, then I should be able to do my trade as well, is my thoughts on it. Some of the things that when you get a call about bee removals that you'll need to ask your customers are, how high are the bees? What kind of structure are they in? Are they in a tree, or are they in a soffit? Is that a first story soffit? Is that a second story soffit? Are they coming in, but the joist space between floors, the junction of the brick and the siding, so that you know what to charge for your work. Once you do it for a while, you get a pretty good idea of the amount of time it takes and what resources you're going to need to get the bees out of there. You can use a tool to be able to see the heat through the walls, and FLIR. There's several companies that make them, but you can use a thermal camera to see about the size of the bees, and on a good day you can get a pretty good idea of where you need to open up. This work is very much construction work. It is not beekeeping. It is construction work under pressure of bees that don't want to be out of their home. So that's why I urge people to understand the value of what they are doing when they're taking bees out of a home. And I'm not going to say don't work for free, but I'm going to say don't work for free, because there's value in it. Now, there are times that I'll barter for the work that I do. There's an instance where there was a young man who had lost his job, his wife, basically everything he had, but he had been given a home that he inherited. So he had no money, but he had a place to live, but there was bees that had been abandoned by another bee remover. And so I got called on an emergency to do that removal, and I gave him a price, and he kind of, I saw the look on his face. He didn't have the money for it. But my truck needed brakes, and he was a mechanic. So that next month, my truck got new brakes on it, and he was happy and I was happy. So if the exchange, the exchange doesn't have to be money, but for me, there needs to be some kind of exchange that everyone's happy with for doing the work. And that way your work is not devalued. That's kind of a sticky point for me this last couple of years, because I see on Facebook groups, people will post their pricing, and I will never post pricing online. Every job is different, and because it's construction work, you've got to look at what needs to be opened. And I see some people posting that they'll do second floor soffit for cheaper than I charge for a valve box. So heck, I'll sub work out to him and mark it up and still make money. So I've had people I've had other bee removers contact me that are new into the business and want referrals from me, and I'll ask them, send me a sample of some work you've done. And what I look for in that, show me pictures. of what you've done. And I look to see whether they're cutting straight lines in the soffit of someone's home. I see how they respect the home that is being opened up. Because it's whether they're doing the repairs or not, the house has to be respected so that somebody can do the repairs in a respectful manner and it be put back together. That integrity within that, and not just being a cut and run company is something that means a lot to me also. I personally prefer to go ahead and put things back together, whether that's considered repairs or not. Is questionable, because if the wood is rotten, or if there's still a half-inch gap between the shingles and the soffit, it's not repaired as far as that is concerned, but the materials put back in place and they can have a handyman do those other repairs later. I just like to leave things at least as good as I found them. I'm going through my notes again, seeing if there's anything that I've missed. I've kind of jumped around, and my notes were in order, and I jumped places that pop into my head. As far as the process of taking bees out of a home, I break things down into 3 different phases. So my first phase is I call just opening the house, and that includes my prep when I show up to the home, getting my smoker lit before my ladder is even off the truck, taking the ladder off, getting it in place, getting all my equipment put ready and together. You don't want to be up there and have the house open and then think about getting your shop vac and your vacuum box ready. It needs to be ready in advance. The second phase is actually, once you've opened the wall up or the soffit, is taking the bees out. I'll go down the ladder. I change my tools. I don't have pry bar on me anymore. I've got a knife, usually a long bread knife. I've got a hive tool for scraping the wood, to get as much of the wax out of there as possible. I've got a bucket that I'll tie onto the rung of the ladder to put the comb in. And then the third phase, once I get the bees out, once I get the comb out, is closing things up. Like I say, some beekeepers don't do that. I do. So that includes filling that void space with insulation. With every job, I included in my bid is the cost of installation and some caulk. That's already included, so the customer doesn't see it, as a nickel and dime on top of what they're already paying for the removal. It's just included in the job. I'd like to mention some of the things that are dangers in doing bee removals. And the number one danger that has affected me this year, besides the things I mentioned earlier, like electrical lines, plumbing, and gas, the biggest danger that I have faced this year has been heat. As we get older, our bodies don't respond the same way they do when we're young. So it really helps if you've got a suit that is a ventilated suit. If you notice that you're getting dizzy up on that ladder or wherever you're at, sit your butt down and cool off. Be sure you have plenty of water. You can drink your water through the mesh of your suit. You don't have to take your hood off. But for me, overheating is something very real. I know that there's lots of bee removers that have you experience heat exhaustion, and some at points it can get to the point of heat stroke. So listen to your body, and if you get hot, sit down. Another thing is gravity. At least 3 beekeepers that do removals that I know in the last 2 years have fallen off a ladder and broken their legs. One slid off a roof. So safety equipment is, it's not mandatory, but it needs to be. Is that job worth it for what you charged for a broken leg? Did a $300 soffit removal, was satisfactory for an $80,000 hospital bill for, shattered leg? So making sure that you're insured, not only for your customers' needs for their home, but personal health insurance to cover accidents is important too. I'm going to say, a lot of people ask me, Rex, how do you get your business? And a lot of that is word of mouth. I receive a lot of referrals. And once you get a call, or, someone shows interest, they email you, they call, the most important thing you can do is return that call or answer your phone. And that's with any business. I don't care if it's bee removals, anything. Answer your phone and respond to your customer in a timely manner. That's golden for any business. And that will get you more, transfers of quotes to work than anything. I don't think I've got anything else. If there's any questions at all, if they've come in, let me know. If there's anything that needs to be, if y'all have questions, just ask, and
Hey, Rex.
yes, sir.
One of the things I was asking is, do you use any kind of retardant in there for like the smell, or is it just filling it in with the insulation?
Typically, I do not, and the reason is I've seen other people's posts where they'll put like an oil-based primer over that the wax that's been impregnated into the wood. I've seen people post that only lasts for about 6 months or so. The smell still permeates out. Bees will be able, their sense of smell is infallible. They know that there's been a hive there before, whether it's been covered up with primer or not. So I do not waste the time to do that. If a customer requests it and wants to pay for that extra service, absolutely. I'm more concerned with filling that space with insulation, filling that void, and making sure that it's sealed completely from the outside to make sure that they can't even get in there. Even if they can smell it, I'd rather have a swarm land on the side of the house than find their way in. So that's my take on it. Others, sell, that job of doing the paint or primer, and I just don't.
Have y'all started training in that new program that you were talking about, the professional program?
We have not yet. We've got our initial board elections coming up this next month. So we've got in our bylaws that we'll be doing, or at least providing a path for new members to be able to contact someone who is doing this professionally and go along beside them to learn. And that's, being a small business, that's hard, and especially for me, when you're a one-man show and you're providing your own income for your household, to train your competition. And so that there's a mental block that I'm personally going through, thinking, you know what, I'm going to train the kid that's going to take my place. But that's okay, because I don't like doing removals for a living. I want to shift my work to education, to things that are on the ground. So me shifting my mindset towards it is a good thing. Do we have any other questions?
I have a question. Earlier you mentioned, hi, I don't know if you see.
Hello.
Earlier you mentioned about the types that were taxable. And when you say that, are you saying that the person who gets paid for that service would then be taxed, or that income should be reported or being taxed on that, or should they be taxing the client, or both?
Well, it's like being a retailer, where you buy something that is a taxable product at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
So that 8.25% sales tax is added to the bill. So if my bill is $500 to my customer, the Texas state sales tax is added to that. And then whether you report that tax monthly, quarterly, or annually, that's between you and the state as to how you and when you get that paid to them.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Couple questions. You talked about a management fee. I've heard or had a few people have asked that, and no idea even where to even start on something like that, or maybe even just refer them to you. But what kind of fees do you get for managing hives?
If someone else is managing the hive or owns the hive and they just want me to manage them and check on them monthly, typically what I'll do is I'll charge, it depends on how many hives they have also. I've got one client down close to White Rock Lake who has 8 hives in his backyard. He's got no desire whatsoever to get into those hives. Whether he gets a honey harvest or not, he doesn't care. But so I charge him right at $30 per hive per inspection. So that includes my labor. If he needs any equipment or feed, varroamite management that's needed. So if I'm, putting oxalic acid in there or apivar strips or, any type of management, those costs are added on, or, he may have extra boxes. So that particular customer, he writes me a big check and says, manage them for however long this lasts, and then I'll write you another check. So
My kind of guy.
I couldn't have asked for anything better on that.
Yeah.
I've got another customer who has a dozen hives on 30 acres in North Richardson. Her, I charge just a monthly fee. And because she's a longtime customer, I include my feed in my fee to her. I charge her $25 a month per hive, and that is a monthly fee, not a per inspection fee. It's pretty close to my home, so it's not 15 minutes for me to drive there. I'm happy with what I'm charging, and she's happy with what I'm charging. And she, because of the land they've got, they're getting their ag valuation on it, and they own the hives instead of leasing them. But any honey that they produce is theirs. I do charge a per pound rate for extracting their honey. I'll take their boxes off, take them to be extracted, and then bring them a 5-gallon bucket or however many 5-gallon buckets of their own honey back, and it's up to them to bottle it.
Okay. One other question. You mentioned a thermal camera.
Yes.
Pretty accurate as far as looking at your hive or in the walls? I mean, as far as the heat source?
It is depending on how far the bees are from that wall. So if you've got, thin sidings, masonite, masonite soffit, hardy soffit, things like that the bees are pretty close to, you'll usually see a pretty good heat signature of where they're at. Things that are going to affect that is if there's a big air gap between the bees and the wall or soffit, that will insulate to some extent and make it harder for it to see the heat difference. Sometimes there's a layer of insulation that is dropped, and so you don't see any heat, but you see bees coming in and out. They're there somewhere. Right. And so it gives you it's a tool just to get you a good idea. Wood, as far as its thermal insulative resistance for hives, is actually pretty low. So it's really easy to look in the winter and see whether there's a heat, signature for either in the top or one side of your hive.
Right.
So it's a good tool. There's different qualities of cameras. I use FLIR brand, and in the last 4 years, I've gone through 3 of their cameras. The ones that attach to your phone are nice, but they're not serviceable. So if that battery stops taking a charge, you're out of luck and you need to buy a new one. So for that reason, the handheld ones that are just by themselves and has its own batteries and it'll have a little screen on it, it's like what you plug into to your phone, but it's its own handheld unit. Those I think are worth the money to spend. For what I've spent on 3, I could have bought one that's a little bit higher quality.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Rex, I got somebody asked a question that said, would you manage hives as far as Howe, Texas? Because if you didn't know where that was, it's close to Sherman.
I've got a friend that is up in that area that's closer to there that I would refer to, and I have no problems referring either removals or management to other beekeepers, because part of what I calculate and what I charge per hive is how far I've got to drive also. If I've got an hour drive to somewhere, I've got to charge more for that time. And if someone else lives closer and can, increase their business somehow and give the customer a better price, that's fine. So would I do it? Yes, I will probably be higher than the guy that lives, in that same county or in that area as far as the cost.
I know the calls that we get, we base them off of, what their problem is before we send them to you or location. Right. A lot of times when they've got a serious situation, that's the ones I like to refer to you because I know you've done that a lot, but I try to get them close to a beekeeper in that area that can handle it, and then move it from there.
Good.
What would your recommendation be for somebody wanting to get into removals?
Don't. Seriously though, it would be to go alongside someone who knows what they're doing, and learn. I've got several friends that will get together on days that they all have off and do a removal together, and they can bounce ideas off each other's head about how to approach opening the structure up. More sets of eyes on something are better. I get calls from other beekeepers that are doing removals and, asking for advice on, hey Rex, I've got this situation, but the bees aren't where I thought they were. Can I send you a picture and tell me what your thoughts would be on either how to open it up? And I'm always more than willing to pass on knowledge. So that's making sure that someone treats their customers in a respectful manner means more to me than losing business. I'd rather somebody do the job right.
So as a new one getting into it, getting side by side with somebody, and then I guess you're saying get your permit from the TAIS to transport the bees, and then is there any other
sales tax permit?
I guess the sales tax permit, and then
Yeah. I would say also on that lines of, if it's somebody new, start out with swarm catches. Learn how to handle bees if they haven't already. Doing swarm catches and easy removals, such as from a valve box, are probably going to be the easiest way to jump into the business. That way you can get used to handling the comb that's not got a frame around it. Everyone's going to have their own way of handling the comb, and how much of it they save or don't. I personally only save maybe one piece of comb that's got brood in it. The rest of it I do not save. That becomes a breeding ground for small hive beetles. So I'll save one piece of comb with brood in it and eggs. That way, if I don't happen to find the queen, they can at least raise a new queen. If I don't have a queen banked already ready for them.
Right. Do we have any other questions from anybody out there? I'm not seeing any on chat.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me on tonight.
Well, like I said, I know you've done some wild and outrageous ones. If you haven't got Harmony Hollow on your site, definitely get on there. He does post lots of pictures from removals. You can see quite a few. And my dad over here says, "What's your tallest one so far that you've done?"
The tallest.
Because I know I've seen you with the cherry picker. So
yeah, and that one really wasn't quite so tall, but the structure of the house was over. The house was down an embankment, so my ladder wouldn't have been tall enough from close enough to the house to get it. So I did have to rent a cherry picker, and I passed that cost along to the customer. Said, yes, I can do it. Here's my removal cost, and here's what the rental company is going to charge for the rental. And I just handed him the bill, and he paid me back for it after the job. I would say roughly about 30 feet. I've got a 28-foot ladder. I have no desire to go any higher than that, and I don't even like going up that high. But I have used my 28-foot ladder to get a trap out started up in a pecan tree where bees were coming in and out of a knot hole up there. I put a one-way exit over that hole. I mounted a box up on there for the bees to move into as they came out and couldn't find their way in. And once the job's done, I come take the box down and take my equipment off the tree and let beetles and wax moths clean up the inside of that tree. Typically, I like to leave the whole of a tree covered with screen also, so the bees don't come back in and become another problem, because it's nothing but a swarm attractant.
Somebody asked, do you have a YouTube channel for the Harmony Hollow?
I do. If you do a search for Harmony Hollow apiary and then maybe use the word honeybee in there also, I do have a YouTube channel. So it's It's mostly bees, but I do some other, things from my life in there too. I've got to, repair my truck or something. There's some other videos on there of my eclectic life.
So are you still driving that old truck?
That old flatbed Ford, I am.
So you got it running.
Oh, I've got a diesel that's been sitting in my driveway for 2 years. I've got an F-250 7.3 liter that this week I should have running. So that'll be good for hauling bees out to West Texas for doing cotton pollination.
All right. I don't see any more questions. Russell?
Thank you all very much.
Appreciate it, Rex.
Thank you all.
Okay. Well, this, I guess we'll conclude the meeting. Again, we're not going to have a meeting next month as far as the Zoom meeting. So our last meeting until January. And as of now, well, there won't be a meeting site at the college, but we'll definitely have another Zoom meeting, and Skip will be running the show. So
We got our business meeting next week.
yes, business meeting on Monday at 6:30. So anyone's welcome to join that. But
And Beekeeping 101 on the 23rd.
yes, that would be the third session, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So unless anyone has any comments or questions they want to get in here at the end.
Just a lot of thank yous, Rex. So good job. Thank you for your time.
Definitely so. Appreciate it. I guess that's it. So let's call it a wrap.